Hello, hello, and welcome to the Property Now podcast. I am very, very glad to welcome our guest for today, Ian Ugarte. G'day, Ian. How are you, mate?
Good. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're up in sunny Queensland, I believe. While we're
Yeah, the Sunshine Coast, or as we sometimes call it, the Rainy Coast.
You're not at that part of the year yet, though. I don't think
Oh
so.
yeah, no, we're in it. We're in the middle. Yeah, so rains during the night, and then it goes to 35 degrees to make it 94% humidity. It's awesome.
And what's the coffee of choice, mate? What are we drinking?
It's licorice and peppermint tea.
Oh, lovely. Very good. I don't have a hot drink for this session, so I'll just need to get through without. That's all good. But no, really good to have you on board, mate. Yeah, this podcast is obviously about property investment, and take a pretty casual approach to our conversations. But I've been looking forward to having you on, mate. I'll get you to introduce yourself, but for the listeners, Ian is an expert in co-living properties, generating higher incomes out of investments for people. So they can obviously make it a bit easier to hold and also help tenants at the same time with providing more accommodation. Mate, you've got a wealth of experience in the space. There's a few too many startups to mention, I believe, 30 or something along those lines. Is that?
Yep, 31 in 30 years. I think they call me a serial entrepreneur, but the question that no one ever asks is, out of 31, how many of them were successful?
Yeah, yeah.
It really took the first 12, 14, 15, where one of them was successful in those 15. I always worked off the do 10 things and one of them will succeed, and it didn't quite get there at 10. So from there, the realization was that there's a certain amount of business that's required, there's a certain amount of background and personnel that are required to make something successful. And since then, we've been able to build and manage some really great businesses. And, we're thankful that Holly and I get to live a really, what's the best way to put it? We get to live a life of choosing. And that's something that, everyone aspires to. And if you can get that, it's awesome.
On the back of a lot of hard work and a lot of risks taken by the sounds of it.
I worked for over 20 years, maybe 25 years, going to sleep at midnight and waking up at 4 a.m. So 4 hours sleep. And that does burn adrenals. And I don't do that anymore, but that work is what's got us to where we are now. Yeah.
Congrats, mate. I think anyone that is brave enough to do what we do deserves a bit of credit, and especially when you've lasted as long as you have and built some real success now, it's a testament, mate. So congrats.
Thank you.
So we won't go through all of the businesses that you've launched, but obviously you're in property now and a very passionate person with respect to what you specialize in. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about sort of what you do and what your key focus is at the moment?
Yeah, I think short in 60 seconds was I come from a family of plumbers, went into the plumbing business as an apprentice, became plumber, then, owned my own business, then started a wastewater company with 7 patents, worldwide patents that held to that wastewater company. Ended up in TAFE, New South Wales, as a head teacher. I was one of the earliest part-time teachers for age into New South Wales TAFE, and worked my way up to 3IC of Sydney Institute, largest education employer in the Southern Hemisphere. And they said that I would get to the top job within 10 to 15 years. I said, how much does it pay? And they said 370. And that year we made about 400,000 in property development on the side. So we went there. So that's where we end up in property development. And then the turning point to go to co-living was became rich and very unhappy. And so I read a quote once that said, rich people have a lot of money and wealthy people have time to spend it. And I got to the lowest point in my life on a day where I had a lot of money in the bank account, and I made a difference to myself by making a change in how we started to adopt, because all I was concerned about was myself. And what we did was we started to research and look at strategies that would make a difference to people. In 2009, New South Wales State Government released granny flats to the standard market through private certification. And everyone went for granny flats, and no one else read the rest of the state environmental planning policy, which had new generation boarding houses in it. I looked at that. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the fact that you could do them in low density, and I went, "This is a winner." Then started down that road of learning. Started looking at other states. Found other policies that were unused, or just or sitting and dormant because it had never been taken away. And all of a sudden, not only was I helping a community problem, I was starting to make more money than what we did before. And so we came up with the slogan, "It needs to make sense before it makes dollars." It needs to help the community in a positive way first. And secondly, it needs to be financial viable. It has to do both of them. And then the project's successful. So from that, I started teaching other people, and here we are now doing it for people, because it's not something I ever wanted to do, but I realized that all the education in the world still has some iffiness about people choosing the right block in the right zoning with the right building class and getting it built right, and disability and all the rest of it that was way too hard for anyone to actually encompass. So we just started doing it, and here we are helping you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and we're really excited about that. Obviously, part of the reason why you're on here is that you're coming on board to assist in different ways with Multi-Live and Buyfair Property Group, which is good. And we only want to work with the best, mate. So it's good to have such experience on board assisting. So thank you.
You call me the best.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Well, the government pays me because they think I'm the best, which is good.
Well, who can ever argue with the argument? If they say you're the best, then you must be.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. No, that's good, mate. Like I agree. I think health is wealth, and I think revenue and profits and these kind of things are a byproduct of adding value to people as well. So we take a similar approach. We try to educate in a down to earth manner that people can understand, and just help where we can. And if that help leads to something, great. If not, then that's okay as well. So co-living, obviously this is one of the areas of your expertise. And for those who don't know what co-living is, why don't you give us a high-level rundown as to what it is and how it works?
Yeah, co-living in its simplicity is taking either converting or purpose building. It's what you do now. Purpose building a property that looks the same as the property next door in a low density zone, but internally what you've got is micro apartments, which are made up of a sitting room, a bedroom, a ensuite, and a kitchenette. And everyone, so there's either going to be 4, 5, up to 9, depending on which state you go to, but 4, 5, or 6 is generally a good little number to work with. And every person has their own area, but they share the common kitchen, which has the cooking oven and a fixed cooktop, and they share the laundry as well. We try and keep the communal areas down to nothing. So effectively what we're doing is we're building either small micro apartment 1-bedrooms or studios inside and in a building. And what happens then is that we're catering for the people that need it the most. Since the 1980s, we as investors have decided that 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses are the way to make ourselves wealthy in the long run. And they do eventually make you there. The problem being that 60 to 80% of all the people that are looking for rentals today are singles and couples, and 60 to 80% of all the available rentals are 4-bedroom houses. So we've got this mismatch in the marketplace. So co-living fixes that mismatch by taking those 4-bedroom houses. And instead of building a 4-bedroom house, let's build a 4, 5, or 6-bedroom house that's got its own self-contained, but not by law, areas within the house. And what's the outcome? Well, an outcome is that the first thing that happens is that the people that were looking for somewhere, the singles and couples looking for somewhere to live, are looking for $600, $700 houses because there's nothing else available on the market. And we've got a housing crisis across the whole country right now. So instead of paying $600 or $700 and having to look after the whole property and do the gardens and pay utilities and pay all the rest of the stuff that goes with that, they can now live in a micro apartment for somewhere around $250 to $400, depending on the location area. On a $600 to $700 4-bedroom range, you're probably looking at about $320 a week. That's sort of the comparison. And then you times that by 5. Now you've got $1,500, $1,600. You get a 6-bedder in, you are now getting $2,000, $2,200 for the same place that used to get $600 or $700. So from an investor point of view, great outcome. from the people that are living in it, they save 1/3 to 1/2 off their normal weekly rent, and their utilities are included up to a certain amount over that they have to pay. But more importantly, we've got a crisis at government level right now. And the government level crisis is that we used to have a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class. The middle class cannot afford to buy houses or cannot afford to rent anymore, and they've squashed down onto the top of the social housing list. And they shouldn't be on the social housing list. So what we do, you and I, we take and market to the people that want to live in the house, which is the old middle class. And we give them somewhere where they can live, they can save money, and within 3 to 5 years, they'll have enough savings to be able to go off and buy their own property. And that's a really big thing, because that's not possible. Like, you only have to ask right now, if you've got a 18 to 30-year-old child that is looking to get in the housing market, the chances are 0 to slim, right, at best. So now we're opening up a whole market, and we're helping the government by taking the pressure off the social housing market and get them to concentrate. We don't do low socio, we don't do people on the dole, we don't do that's not our job. Our job is to look after the middle class, get the cash flow that we need, and then everything fixes itself.
Yeah, there's a number of things to unpack there. That was a very good explanation. Thank you. Things that really stand out for me there are obviously solving a problem of the housing crisis. We don't, and most people know this, we don't have enough houses for the amount of people that are moving here and being born and living within the country, especially with the changes in the demographics of, we don't have the 5-person house as much as we used to anymore. It's, singles and young couples, and people aren't having kids as often.
I'll give you an exact example of that. There's 2 things to say. The first thing I'll say is that in our team huddle every day, every week on what's today, Thursday, we have Katie's Corner. Katie's Corner, we've got an overseas. So Katie's Corner was basically set up. Our IT worker wants to know more about what we actually do in the business, and the way to do that is for her to understand a little bit more what's going on. We've now shifted that to Sarah's Corner, because Sarah lives in the Philippines, and the question she asked today is, why is property so expensive in Australia? So I unpacked that for her, and I said, just so at the moment, average price across Australia is about $800,000 to buy a house. And I said, in your area, she said, it's $17,000 US to buy a 4-bedroom house, right? Yes, the wages are different. I forgot the second point. What were we talking about?
What's driving the expensive nature of Australian real estate versus the Philippine real estate, by the sounds of it? 17.
Keep on going. I'll come back to the other point.
No, all good.
The households. So
yeah, that's right.
Let's look at my previous household, right? So when I was married to my ex-wife, 4 daughters in one household, 6 people in one household, right? Then one of my daughters left, went to Sydney. So she's met a guy, and then she moved into a house or a unit. So there's one household that became 2 households. Then another daughter left, and she's now living on her own. Then we've got another daughter that lives with her girlfriend, and then we've got another daughter that lives with my ex. So out of one house, and now we've got a household with Holly and I. So out of one household, we then ended up with 5 households, and each one of them are either single or couple households. So this is what's happening more and more in Australia, but we're not catering for that change. And it's been happening since the census in 2006, and as early as 2001, you saw the click in the census data to start to revolve around that.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's a really good explanation as well, because I don't think people think of it that way often enough. And I would imagine, like, speaking from a tenant standpoint, the location's really critical here too, because when you can build these types of homes, people don't have to live in the city in a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio, or because they're just not available in these areas that people want to live in.
Correct. Yeah. And so what's important for clients of yours is that where you're sourcing properties that are going to have one or more key functionalities around being close to either a hospital, an airport, an industrial estate, or a shopping center, right? Those hubs that are within 10 minutes walking or 10 minutes driving distance is what people want. And if you can give them that, they're happy to move out into burbs, because they pay half as much as living in the metro, right? And I think this is a longer conversation if we wanted to go into it, which we can do another day, but decentralization needs to happen in Australia. You know, we've got Australia is the same size literally as America, and yet we've got 28 million and they've got 280 million. So why is it that they can do that? Because they've decentralized. They've got space all over the place and they're living in deserts as well, right? We could do the same, but we just love our harbors and surf beaches, you know?
It's I talk about supply and demand with driving prices of property in Australia, and that is pretty much the answer, isn't it? It's that you've got so much demand around certain areas, and that's why we see the capital growth in capital cities perform so consistently.
Yeah.
Access to capital and then a competition amongst buyers trying to get into property.
Yeah, and then so we haven't got enough housing for the population we've already got, plus an increasing amount of households being created every day when a child leaves home, because the child of the baby boomers and the baby boomers' childs are now the children are now coming out of that. But then throw on top of that immigration, and so you've got hundreds of thousands of people that before COVID were approved to come but couldn't come during COVID. And then the rest of the world looked at the two countries that handled COVID the best. We've got Australia and New Zealand. And if you're overseas and you said, you know what, I want to go to one of those places, are you going to choose Hobbit Town or are you going to use Australia, right? So most people are choosing to immigrate to Australia. So that's just increasing more and more and more. And we also, not only that, we also have a skills shortage from destroying our manufacturing process 10, 12, 15 years ago that needs to be filled again. And they're skilled work. We don't have them here. So we got to bring them in, more housing's required. It's this perpetual motion of housing affordability issues that will go on for a while if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, well said, mate. I want to touch on investor versus tenant. So obviously, we're killing two birds with one stone here. We're helping both sides of the equation. So, they're working together. Tell me what the advantages are for the investor, and what's going to be asked. I get asked it, you get asked it, we all get asked it. Oh, what are the quality of the tenants? And, how well are they looking after the house and all of these kind of things, and hence the property management requirements.
And that's always come up. It's always come up as a perception issue that as soon as we have multiple people in one house, it's because they can't afford a whole house. And that's not necessarily true. What it means is that they don't want to spend the affordable housing income or more than that. So affordable housing is not low socio people. Affordable housing is spending no more than 30% of your gross wage on housing, whether it be a mortgage or whether it be rental. So as soon as you spend more than 30%, you're living unaffordably or you're under housing stress. So what we get is people that can afford. So just to put that into perspective, if I earn 50 grand a year and I spend more than $300 a week on my accommodation, I'm under housing stress. If I earn 100 grand a year and I spend more than $600 a week, I'm under housing stress. That means that you don't have enough money to save at the end of the week to be able to buy your own home. Effectively, that's what we're looking at. And so there was a study done by the Housing Industrial Union, and it looked at all the houses for rent that were available on the market in metro and regional. And the outcome was that at the time, it was in 2019, at the time, 4-bedroom houses were renting for $420 a week, and 2-bedroom houses were renting for $415 a week. Now, the difference between those two is that there's not enough 2-bedders, which is forcing, the 2-bedroom prices upwards because people don't need more than 2-bedders. So as an outcome, we've now got this issue with people thinking that because it's a mixed house or a shared house or what they would think is a boarding house, it must be low socio because that's where dirty old men used to live, and I get it all the time. Oh, you must have drug dealers and criminals and pedophiles. I don't know why they think that pedophiles are low socio. If only pedophiles lived in co-living properties, I reckon we could stop it pretty quick, right? But that sort of functionality in someone's head, perception, is so different to the reality. I was only just thinking about it this morning. we all, obviously, as part of our rentals, you need to know what job they do. Everyone in our properties are employed. Everyone pays the rate that they need to pay. And at the moment, there's a $12 per room increase per quarter. That's what's happening. So effectively, you're talking about, call it $50 a quarter. That means $200 a year. That's an extra 10 grand of extra cash flow that's happening right now in the co-living market. And the type of people that we rent to are nurses and doctors and tradies and accountants that are making their way up the ladder, lawyers that are doing the same thing. We've got people that are employed. The other big demographic that we have coming in, we effectively have three different types of demographic. We have the single 22, 25 to 35-year-old. They've just finished uni, or they're working their way up the ladder of getting more pay in their job. They come into our properties, save them some money. We've got the 30 to 45-year-old couples. These are professional couples. These are, they're either on a C wage or getting there. And she gets close to 40 and she says, you know what? We've had a great time Friday nights drinking with everyone down after the stock market crashes. And we're now in a place where we've spent all our money. I want to save, I want to buy a house, and I want to have a baby once we own a house, because that's Australia, right? So they knuckle down, they work long hours for 3 to 5 years, they save enough money, and off they go buy a house, and she then has her baby in her 40s. And then we've got the biggest growing demographic of homelessness in the country right now, which is the 55-year-old single female who looked after house and home for the last 20 or 30 years, and then finds a place where she's living with a husband she doesn't like, and the kids have gone and left the roost, and she says, I'm out of this. And he waves at $100,000 in front of her, and she takes it, right? Because she just wants to get out. She doesn't think it's fair, but she doesn't want to be here anymore. She was supposed to, have it set for life because she married a guy with a good job, but it turns out that guy's not such a great guy. And then they go out to try and find work. They can't get work because apparently they're not qualified enough. These are people that looked after house, home, finances, timetabling, everything you can imagine. They try and find a house. They've got no rental background. They can't afford the housing because they haven't got a job. Their 100,000 becomes 50, becomes 20. They go and buy themselves a van, and they're now what we call homeless because they're sleeping in a van. And look, I live on a really nice property, and at the end of our street, Holly and I go for a jog, and there's always 1 or 2 different cars with women that are sleeping in the back of their cars every week. And this is disastrous in Australia. So for those people who question whether we've got drug dealers, criminals, or pedophiles in our properties, no, we've got 55-year-olds as an anchor resident. She's the first one we put in there because she becomes the adopted mother. She tells you when things go wrong. She's on the ball all the time. And we then place a household around her, essentially a family like she used to have of mature people where everyone just gets on really, really well.
I think it's something that people aren't aware of. Well, I know that it's something that people aren't aware of, is that the strategy that you actually apply to filling these homes. Because I know you actually said some stats with me a little while ago about how many inquiries you get per room when you advertise these properties. But it's the key approach of actually putting the right person in first and building around them, isn't it?
Yeah.
So.
And we've seen. I tried it at the beginning myself. I had this altruistic, love to want to fix the over 55-year-old problem, and you put over 55-year-olds together, and so. I always make the joke that you put one 55 in a hold as the anchor resident, but you don't put a second one in there because that's disastrous. They'll kill each other, right? They're set in their ways. They want things done in particular ways. So we quickly moved away from that model. And people say, oh, yeah, but you've got students in your houses. We do not put students in any of our properties. Student accommodation, you don't want. For a number of reasons. Firstly, they're only there for 2/3 of the year. 1/3 they're away. What are you going to do during that Christmas break where they finish in November and come back in March, right? Secondly, they're not the greatest residents. They love parties, and it's a good chance that you'll end up with a property that might have a little bit of fatigue at the end of it. But thirdly, and most importantly, knowing that I came out of TAFE New South Wales, we stopped making money in education and we started to invest in TAFE New South Wales in accommodation. And if I have to compete against a uni or a TAFE who can drop their prices and still get government funding, I don't want to be in that market, and no one else should be in that market either. So effectively putting same together doesn't work. What we worked out was anchor resident and build a house together. Now we will, it's almost like you develop a sixth sense. It's like a chef who knows he's about to get burnt, or she is about to get burnt, and pulls back rather than getting burnt. A plumber, I used to get burnt. Now I don't any. Maybe still do now because I've lost my trade. But as an apprentice, you learn very quickly. If something feels hot, you pull away from it, but your sense isn't there. We've developed a sixth sense on how to put a household together. And people question all the time, gee, you must have a lot of problems and must have heaps of hassles. We have less hassles with our co-living properties than what we do with our standard everyday family resident properties. And that comes in time and time again. You know, and the beauty is, I'm talking a lot here, sorry, mate.
No, it's all valuable, mate.
The beauty with the rental process that we go through in co-living is we've got much more power as managing agents and landlords than what we do in a standard everyday residential. The notice periods are shorter. If they stop paying rent, you can almost get them out immediately. If they're dangerous to anyone else in the property, because they're unrelated parties, you can get the police to turn up and evict them almost immediately in those circumstances. So you've got issues that can come up, but can be dealt with much quicker than under standard normal residential leases.
I don't know what the changes are like in Queensland, but in Victoria, they've just announced again recently substantial changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, and it's pretty much all in favour of the tenant, you know, which is great for the tenant. That's good. But as an investor looking to put a lot of money into building something and housing someone, it's a little bit scary. So knowing that difference between the two is very important, and something we try and explain to people so that they can get it. Can you just explain quickly the difference as far as the legalities are concerned with the 1A and the 1B, and
Sure.
How that works as a high level?
Yep. So this was a learning curve for me, and how I've ended up as a government advisor around the country, state and local council, is because when I started, I needed someone who knew everything about the building codes, National Construction Code, AS 1428, you know, electrical standard, disability standards, you know, the compliance around planning, the compliance around the Real Estate Tenancy Act. But I couldn't find one. I could find individuals. They all contradicted themselves. So I had to go down the path of learning all of it so that I could do something and make sure that I was legal and compliant, because after all, ignorance is bliss. If you go and do a co-living property and you don't tick a box, there are government agencies that look after people that live in your property. And if you haven't ticked the box, you are up for, in Victoria, it's $200,000 fine and possible jail time. Similar in Queensland. If you get it wrong, ignorance doesn't come up as an argument. They're concerned about people living in your property. And the reason behind that is you need a different building classification code. So when we buy a townhouse or a villa or a freestanding home, we are almost always buying what we call a Class 1A building. Okay, so it's a Class 1 building. And in the National Construction Code, a Class 1 building is a family dwelling. Okay, so effectively we have a family that lives in there and they eat together, they shop together, they sleep in the same house, they're blood, adopted or similar in the household. Once you put unrelated parties, and it doesn't matter whether they get to know each other or not, if you put them into the household by individually advertising, you now change your building classification from a 1A to a 1B. So what's a 1B building? A 1B building has to be under 300 square meters and it has to have less than 12 people in it. Inside that building, it's built exactly the same as a normal 1A building. So it's either brick, veneer, lightweight construction, or double brick if you're in WA, or mud brick if you're if you're on the wacky tobacco. It's exactly the same construction, but inside there's 5 things that are required. You need disability access, disability bathroom, and the person with a disability needs to be able to get into every room. We're yet to actually rent a room to someone with a disability, with physical disability. You need smoke detectors are in every room, and they need to be linked so that if one alarm goes off, they all go off. You need emergency lighting attached to that with battery operation, not the exit lights. It's simply just another down light that turns on when the alarms go off. We need fire extinguisher blankets and a few other bits and pieces like that. And we need external door handles that allow someone to be able to get out of the house by one single function. That means, and the example is, if you go into a disabled toilet, because I know everyone does every now and then, close the door and you close the door and you lock it and you push down on the handle and it unlocks, right? And then you lock it again and you push down, it unlocks, and then you lock it again and you sit on the toilet going, please don't come in, please don't come in. So the action of pushing down and it unlocking automatically needs to happen on the external door so people can get out in case of a fire. Now, the reason the code is important from going from 1A to making sure it's a 1B is because in the 1A house, if I've got a fire that happens in my house and my children are in the bedrooms, I will die making sure they get out. Whereas in an unrelated party house, if a fire happens on the first night that everyone's sleeping in the place, their main thought is, I'm going front door. I'm not really concerned about everyone else. So that's why we need a different classification of building.
Critical. You would never think of that, but it's so logical. It makes
it's the number one reason. And this is the disastrous part. You may remember the Childers backpacker fire that changed fire and fire rating all over the country very quickly. The most significant fire that happened in a share living house was a young couple living in a legal share house, and the locks on their doors were key deadlock locks, and there were bars on the windows. There was a fire that broke out in the house, and this young couple got disorientated in the smoke and they couldn't find the key to their door and they died trying to get out of their room. And that's cannot happen. That's really affecting people's lives. And as an owner of a property, you've done the wrong thing, and you may not have the understanding or empathy of the family that just lost that couple, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. And then not only that, eventually going to catch up with you. In the meantime, you're probably going to end up in jail. And that sort of safety and security of people living in your home should be the number one investor strategy. And then what comes after that needs to make sense before it makes dollars. So if you can do both, then it's an outcome that's beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, that's awesome, mate. I couldn't agree more. It probably makes sense to have those kind of doors on most properties, if anything, because, well,
you know what gets me? So the 1B building requires all these link smoke detectors, right? Queensland has brought it into law that you need to have it on every rental property now. That came in 2 years ago, right? I cannot understand for the life of me why someone who owns their own home with their own family in it wouldn't do the same thing. Like, the cost is negligible compared to the outcome of, firstly, just being alerting that there's a fire could put the fire out quickly. So it would cost, you would make your savings up very quickly if you stopped a fire quickly, right? But more importantly, you've just probably most likely saved your family's life by having a smoke detector that goes off in the kitchen and wakes everyone up in the middle of the night. That's just crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Smoke detectors are pretty loud. Definitely ones in my house would wake me up in any one of the rooms. But no, I agree with you. No, that's awesome, mate. So what I was going to ask is, from a feature standpoint in the home, this is probably more geared towards the investor now. Like, what are the kind of key features that you're putting in these homes to make sure that they're attracting people? And what I'm talking about is obviously, air conditioners and these kind of things. And
so the properties that you're selling have furnishings. So all the properties are furnished. There's not one property that you've put together or anyone else has put together that is unfurnished, based on the fact that most people in that age bracket that's looking for the older age bracket don't really have a lot to their name anyway, as far as a whole household. So occasionally we get people say, oh, can I swap the mattress out because I've got an orthopedic mattress, I've got scoliosis or whatever. That happens occasionally. But otherwise, people are coming in and moving into a fully furnished studio. So firstly, they move into a fully furnished studio, which is attractive. So that's great for the landlord. Someone's going to come in really quickly. They've got air conditioners in every room, and landlords are going, oh, the air conditioners are just going to turn them on and turn them down to 16 or up to 28 degrees, and I'm going to end up paying for all the costs of that. Well, a couple of things. Firstly is written into their agreement is if they use more than $100 per quarter of utilities, they're paying the excess. Okay, so we sort of build in a little bit into the rent, but generally, if they use more than that, we give them a notice and saying we know, and we've got aftermarket readers. So every room tells us how much power they're using, so we know very quickly if they've gone and bought a 2,000 watt plug-in heater to make up for that, right? But more importantly, the air conditioners themselves, the system that we use has a remote control that will turn the unit off every 45 minutes or 45 to 2 hours, depending on how we program it. And also built into the programming is a proxy. So when they turn it down to 16, it's operating at 21 degrees. And when they turn it up to 28, it's operating at 25 degrees. That temperature is like someone can walk out of a hot day, walk in there and go, you know what, it's pretty cool in here at 21. So that helps. So everyone's got their own air conditioner. We don't put air conditioners in the main areas. We want people to stay to their own space. So the less mingling that happens, the better off we are in general. It'll never become a party house that way. We have 2 washing machines with 1 laundry tub, so that generally that can be used by 2 people at the same time. We make sure that they've got their own pull-out induction stoves inside, so fully furnished down to forks, knives, spoons, plates, right? Yeah. There's 2 in every room. So what that means is that they can cook in their own room. They've got full insurance for it. So insurance is about double of normal housing insurance.
For the investor.
For the investor, yeah. So the insurance is available. The house itself is set up in a way to give someone their own space. Some of the features we like to include where possible is we have a sliding door in their room to a side courtyard or a rear courtyard. That little bit of open space gives them their own space. And again, no mingling. My project manager, who looks after all our stuff, moved up from Victoria, and we put him into one of the co-living properties up here. And he lived there for 18 months. And he said he had 3 conversations with people in that 18 months in the rest of the house. Right. So, and generally it was like, you park me in a bit. Can I get out? But everyone's respectful. Parking's a big thing that we should talk about. There is a minimum amount of parking that we require to put into properties. And what we do is we put that in, plus where possible, we add more. You are always going to get spillover into the road, especially when you've got 6 rooms. In saying that, we pick properties particularly where we know that it's part of the development of an estate or where there's infill blocks. We're looking for a property that on the roadside has actual designated parking. So in a cul-de-sac, you're normally in some of the cul-de-sacs in Queensland, you go to the end and there's 3 parking spaces in the middle. So you go around those parking spaces. So where we can, we pick those up or we add them onto site. So there's enough parking. Ultimately, people just move in, are happy, and they just live their life in there.
And talk about cost versus return, mate. So what kind of cost do we see in a new building space to build something like this compared to a traditional home of a similar nature? Obviously, you're making a few alterations and increases and transferring it across to 1B and whatnot. Yep. Versus the return, let's call it, I think one of the challenges in Victoria in particular, which is where this is going to specialise in, is rental yields are quite low compared to what people are paying for properties. The growth is high, capital growth is high, but the yield is low. So cost to build it as a guide, obviously.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you can say that there's packages that'll start, mid 7s. Our 6s have disappeared very quickly. In Victoria, you're looking mid 7s up from that, and effectively expect out of that for a 5 or 6 bedroom model a 10% gross return. So if you look at it from the perspective of having to pay on an 80% interest only on 80%, you're looking at about 20 to 25 grand of cash flow after costs. So that's after paying your interest, after paying the rental agency, after paying insurances, any utilities that you need to pick up. We send in a housekeeper, so a cleaner and a gardener. So a cleaner every 2 weeks and a gardener, depending on the season, every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So by the time you've got all of that dusted out of the way, there's 20, 25 grand sitting in your bank account. The kicker here is, and this is a double-edged sword, is that as part of a new build, depreciation has been funneled towards investors building and buying new properties. And the biggest scale of depreciation that you'll get is on your bathrooms and your kitchens. Well, if you build a 6 micro apartment co-living property, you've got 7 kitchens and 6 bathrooms, which depreciate like crazy, right? And that depreciation helps you with your cash flow. So yeah, you might end up with positive cash flow. And there's a lot of people like my dad, who would say, don't want to pay tax. Pay the tax because you're earning money, then claim your depreciation on top of that, and you're going to get lots more back to you. So the kicker with depreciation, and so it's maybe a discussion for another day, is that when you do sell, obviously depreciation comes back into the capital cost base, and there's a little bit of that needs to be paid back.
Awesome, mate. And obviously those returns are not returns that we get on a traditional property. I think most properties that we see now are sort of sitting 15 grand negatively geared as a guide. So that's a pretty big gap between
huge
the outcome
and add to that once you've got people moving in. So you mentioned our stats, right? So we'll advertise in a new area. We like to advertise a room to see what sort of response we get. We advertise between Thursday night and Sunday night. For some reason, between Monday morning and Thursday morning, no one thinks about where they have to live in 2 weeks' time. I don't know why, but that's just the way it goes.
What are they doing on Saturday night? Maybe that's the problem.
I don't know. So we put it on. We put a test out on Thursday through to Sunday. We are generally looking for about 350 clicks on that. If we get 350 clicks, we're looking for 60 solid inquiries where they actually stay on the page for a little bit of time. And then from staying on the page, how many actual messages we'll get. We're looking somewhere between 12 to 22 messages. If we know that we're getting 12 to 22 messages for one room, we're going to be able to fill a house really quickly. And we know the price point that they're willing to pay. So what we do is we start high. We don't get enough responses. We drop 10, we drop $20 the following it, see till we hit the sweet spot. And then we can confidently go to an investor like you're doing and say, this is what we're going to be able to get in rent. And the outcome is strong. And the thing about co-living is that in a strong market like we're in now, we've got a negative vacancy rate. So effectively, we're trying to fill a room of 5. We get 10 applications. That's already, for the next house that's coming on the market, we've now already banked another possible 5. But out of those 5, probably 2, because the other 3 will find somewhere else, will be able to go into the next property that comes onto the market. And that's in a strong market. We're strong in a good, strong market. We're stronger when we have an economic crisis. When there's an economic crisis, we strengthen because the first place people stop spending is on going out and eating at restaurants. And the second place they stop spending is accommodation. They go looking for something cheaper. And that's where we then end up with this competitive market. And at the moment, even though we're not in that place, we're still getting a $12 per quarter increase generally across the board, across Australia right now. And so not only are you 20, 25 grand positive cash flow, a year later, you're likely to have more cash flow, depending on interest rates, because the room rates will be going up.
And it's interesting with interest rates, there's a lot of people saying that they're likely to come down at some point. Obviously, we can't predict the future, but that's definitely appealing for people too. And I wanted to touch on, I think, with every single potential investor that we speak with, and it's a lot, it's clarity creates confidence. It's when they have confidence because of the clarity that they know they're going to get a certain outcome or pretty close to a certain outcome, it makes it a lot easier for them to make a decision. So that's
Yeah,
what we
absolutely.
like about partnering with yourself as well, because you can share that detail and say, hey, here's what we're seeing, and this is what it's going to lead towards.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean, I learned very early on from one of my mentors, confusion equals no. And so once you give someone clarity, and look, there's no doubt we still get clients asking very specific questions. What about the mail? Well, you've got a mailbox. Yeah, but what if you've got to go to a room? We've got a inside the property. It's the
the
job.
room under the stairs.
We've got it's another important point. There's, as you walk in through the door, there's some pigeonholes for each room so that the mail gets put into those ones. We have within the house, house rules, and you have to follow those house rules. And if you breach those house rules, then we've got the ability to enforce an eviction on not being compliant with, because they've signed, making sure they've signed a lease based on the fact that they're going to adhere to these rules. So if they don't, they play music after a certain time that's too loud and they get a warning and they do it again. Well, then this starts to continue down the line. We've also learned very strongly around how we build these houses to make sure that the outcome is right. And that is, we don't put TVs on an interjoining wall. It's always on an external wall or one that doesn't join the one next door, because obviously, even though we soundproof, there's still a vibration of some sort that comes through there. So we've learned over the last, we're talking 15 years now, that the way to put a house together, not only in its construction, but how the people live inside it and how they operate, is all been joined into one. And, and then the clarity comes and there's no confusion. And then your investors can be confident about it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, mate. Well, look, I just want to say thank you. I think what you've shared today is an exceptionally detailed amount of information that, I would think will help a lot of people have more clarity around making decisions. And I think of everything that you've shared, the impact of being able to help not only investors and tenants, but also help a housing crisis that is pretty substantial at the moment, help people save money to be able to get into their own homes and to provide more, more houses for people down the track is probably the key thing from all of this.
And the thing for me is that the investors that are working with you and are buying these, they can go to a barbecue and sit at the end of the table and say, you know what, I am a property investor, and I think you might think that I'm actually destroying the market, but what I'm doing is actually helping the market, and this is how I'm doing it. And they can confidently say, without feeling bad about, like let's be serious, a family, a mum and dad are only buying property for their future wealth. They're not doing it to try and destroy the marketplace, right? Or try and make it housing unaffordable. But at least if that's going to happen and you're doing it and you're helping the community at the same time, and you're helping government at the same time, and you're helping the people that are living in it at the same time, whilst at the same time, getting some cash flow, you're doing good whilst you're making a profit. It's okay. It's not, it's something that you can be proud about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I think this is the way forward. We need to do something, and the government are trying, and they've come out with different numbers on what they're going to do. But the reality is that they're not delivering on that. So I think the private community needs to, can contribute a lot more as well, and do our bit.
Yeah, I've always said it's the private investor that destroyed the housing market. It's the private investor who can fix it as well.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very much, Ian. It's you clearly, this is why you're the best in this space. I couldn't be more grateful, and I'm sure our listeners will be very grateful as well. Unless you've got anything to finish on.
No, just you're in the right space, helping your clients out. That's what I'm happy about, watching you do that.
Yeah, thanks, mate. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yes.
All right, we'll leave it there and talk to you soon. Thank you again.
See ya.
See you, mate.